children, I'll tell you the news. Don't worry about the names or dates, you already know it's true. Your doctor hates your baby, the prime minister's a ghost, and all them folks are sailing here 'cause they're in love with boats. Superfoods can save us from all our evil sin. JFK and Elvis own a bar in Wisconsin. Vaccinations were created by the CIA to steal votes from Bernie Sanders and turn your babies gay. So click the link you think you'd like and get tooled for a fight against those lefty fascist communists who are leaning too far right.
Hi and welcome to Not Another Fake Newscast. I'm Paul.
And I'm Jerry, and we're here today with Darren Loki McGarvey, who is here back. Welcome back, Darren, for your second time on the show.
Nice to be here, and I think we talked first at the Edinburgh Fringe in my dressing room.
That's right.
And I was probably a bit more caffeinated and stressed as well at the time, so it's nice to be in a bit more chilled out environment.
It was a good interview and it was well received. Folks seemed to enjoy it, man.
I'm glad to hear it.
So yeah, I mean, what's been happening since then?
Well, since then, what did I do? Well, did the Fringe and then did the TV series for the BBC, and that was a lot of hard work, but it was well received. And then I've been trying to work on my second book to varying degrees of success. Then I decided I needed a break, so I took a wee bit of a break the last kind of 8 weeks, and really the election was the first time I felt any great need to formally re-enter public discourse in any meaningful way.
Well, you kind of intimated to me that it's maybe the first time in a wee while that you've actually felt inspired enough to want to write and want to kind of get involved and get dug into things again.
Absolutely. I mean, there's something about me, I don't know if it's my nature or if it's a hint of sadomasochism perhaps, but there is nothing for me quite like staring into the abyss and all my critical faculties just seem to activate. So when you're presented with a harsh reality such as that we all had to confront, for those of us on the left, I mean, on Friday the 13th, the morning of the election results coming in, then I started to think, actually this might be in a strange way a great opportunity, because given that we're going to be confined to the political margins for the foreseeable future, this gives us a bit of time to perform a fearless and thorough inventory on what sacred cows need to go, what ideas are outdated or need to be presented in new ways, and even maybe we have to look at some of the kind of clientele that we've come to depend on to frame the events for us and navigate the left through it, because ultimately you can blame the press, you can blame Brexit, but actually when you deep dive into those things, you see actually that this is a pattern that's repeated all over Europe. In Austria, in Germany, in the Netherlands, in France, the left is coming up missing electorally, and so Brexit is not an issue in any of these countries.
Yeah.
And we need to get more honest with ourselves about what is it about the way we go about our business, because the manifesto was popular and people are not necessarily against left-wing ideas. There's something about how we present ourselves in relation to the status quo that I think people are frightened of, and then the assumptions that and conclusions we draw as to why that is actually remove us further from reality, and then we're just all on the margins arguing with ourselves.
Well, I think that's an interesting viewpoint then, and something that I hadn't actually kind of really confronted myself is we're not actually peculiar. We look at Brexit just now in the UK and we think, oh well, we've got a peculiar set of circumstances that we're operating under, but realistically across Europe the same thing's happening.
Well, not even just Europe, but even in the US, you know what I mean? It's still very similar. I mean, the US doesn't have a Brexit issue. I mean, they've got plenty of other issues, but they are also seeing a rise of the right, certainly a move away from left-wing politics. So it is something that's happening across the Western world, or I mean, you know what I mean?
Yeah, and there are obviously various reasons you could speculate as to why that is. I mean, probably for for the purposes of thinking through it methodically, it's best to start in the immediate aftermath of the election result, where many of the main players in the kind of Labour movement or under Corbynism really just went into a state of denial immediately after. Now, you can't hold that against people. It's a natural reaction to being heartbroken. It's a natural reaction to disappointment. I don't know if, feeling rejected and everything you've pinned your hopes on falling apart in front of your eyes necessarily kind of catalyses a period of clear thinking. No, it doesn't. But unfortunately, I think it set the tone for a certain section of the left. And what I started to become aware of as I began to think through the various issues on the left, not just in terms of the posture politically in relation to the centre ground, in relation to capitalism and the system, but also some of the internal stuff that's been going on in the left for the last few years, the culture war. From a distance, the left just looks like a messy, unforgiving place that relies primarily on condemnation and shaming to further its political objectives in the absence of any traditional political power. And I think we were getting somewhere with sorting through some of these discussions. And then Corbyn came, and Corbyn became this reason for us to postpone that inventory that we had to take on what our politics mean in the 21st century, what our politics mean in the age of social media, and how often we behave and think in ways we don't realise that from a distance people think that's absolutely mental. So there is lots of stuff to unpack.
I mean, we've certainly discussed before that between right-wing and left-wing politics, you do notice that right-wing politics, or more centre to right-wing politics, have a more clear agenda, and I mean, I'll use the word, but like camaraderie. Essentially, they have a clear view and a clear aim. I mean, obviously not an aim that I align with, but they have a clear aim of what they're doing, whereas it's almost like right-wing politics want this, and left-wing politics, everything else falls under left-wing politics, or left of right. So there is no, like, there is just this endless expanse of left-wing political ideals, and lots of them don't match up. Do you know what I mean?
Well, there's a lot of Sorry, what were you going to say, Jerry?
I was just going to say, I think there is a problem as well with pragmatism on the left, in terms of, you look at something like the Brexit Party were prepared to do a backroom deal with Johnson, step down and avoid splitting the vote in seats that were got to be marginal, and give that vote to the Conservatives, whereas Labour, Liberal Democrats, the SNP were far more interested in throwing mud at each other and arguing with each other than actually coming up with a coherent strategy to try and keep the Tories out.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, even just to go back to the aftermath of the election, some of the more high profile people, including kind of Novaro Media and all that, and I feel like I just turned my telly on one day and all these kind of cookie cutter university campus grown lefties were all speaking and framing events on behalf of everyone, and no harm to anyone personally, but I mean, Aaron Bastini was forecasting the complete collapse of conservatism in October 2019. You know what I mean? He was, and that this was going to be the kind of foreshadowing of the collapse of capitalism. And even just that language, the constant overuse of the language of crisis, is a problem, because what it shows is the left is operating in a paradigm where it sees everything through the lens of late stage capitalism. So when you're going into communities and you're trying to radicalise people with this language of crisis, ultimately what you're doing is you're describing a world that most people don't recognise. Now, you can argue about the legitimacy of talking about a crisis or the moral urgency of talking about it in relation to the environment or politics or whatever, but if you're not prepared to kind of become aware of how your language and tone immediately is off-putting, because what you're saying is to people who might vote for you, actually the world that you think you're living in isn't that world, and it's falling apart, and that's why you need us. It's not really, you're not putting your first foot forward. For example, an analysis of capitalism that does not acknowledge some of the benefits of capitalism in just a realistic way, and in a kind of logistical sense, it just doesn't get anywhere. You know, from the left, the far left, everything capitalism touches is bad, everything is evil, or at least that's how it seems from a distance. So there's no attempt really on the left to meet people where they are. And see, if you look at, like, I mean, I'm a qualified arts practitioner, right? See, when I'm training initially to go into communities and educate people, there's a process of what's called reflective practice, right? Which is when things aren't going well, you've got a wee list of things that you check and that you'll be prepared to modify. And so the first one is you. Right? Is there something about the way that I'm doing this that means that these kids are not connecting? If it's not me, then I double check. Is it the material, right? So this is whatever I'm using to try and engage them. So when it comes to the left, we're talking about the political analysis, the way that we go about our business. Is there something about that that's wrong? And then the third thing is the environment, right? The environment in which you're working, the environment in which you're operating. And then on the left, the environment is not very inclusive of anyone who just happens to see things from a different perspective. And this translates to so many issues currently going on. So, you know, I sort of started to break it down in my head. If someone was to ask me, how would we go about fixing this? And it sort of breaks down into maybe 4 or 5 main things. The first one is the role of self-interest on the left. I mean, self-interest, we believe, is a Tory thing. You know, but how many people adopted the position they adopted in the aftermath of the election because they had to preserve a reputation, because they had been out into communities selling this idea that change was going to come but hadn't thought about what they would do if they lost? How many people's careers are blossoming? How many people have derived a sense of prestige and purpose from this radical left-wing analysis that doesn't make sense to anyone except the radical left? And actually, when you look at underneath all of the behaviours and attitudes that people on the left are happy for people to see, actually you realise that people who adopted a kind of we need more Corbyn than Corbyn attitude, and the double downers, as I'm sort of calling them in my head, you realise actually that's an act of self-preservation. That's an act of self-preservation because they have boxed themselves in ideologically and therefore have nowhere to go. So they will cede ground to anyone who navigates the political landscape with even the slightest degree of ideological flexibility. And that means everybody from Farage to Johnson to the centrists, everybody who isn't so tightly clung to this one idea of how it has to be, can move around with a certain level of grace in comparison to what happens on the left. And, you know, the list goes on and on.
And how are you going to engage somebody who doesn't agree with you to change their mind if the immediate reaction to their views and opinions is you're wrong?
Aye.
It's not possible to do that.
Nah, the left is not famed for its self-awareness or emotional intelligence. There is a way to go about dealing with some of the more complicated or potentially controversial issues. And because there's a culture on the left of young activists turn up, they have big strong opinions about things, and we send them out into the community because they've got exuberance and energy that a lot of people a bit longer in the tooth and who've suffered defeat no longer have, right? They're a bit more cynical. The problem with getting young people in and recruiting them is that they're extremely idealistic, which is exactly how they should be, but also that a young person of a certain age, by virtue of the fact they have limited life experience, cannot carry a message with the sufficient weight and depth to persuade anyone of anything other than the fact that they're precocious and annoying. Right? And I say that as a formerly precocious and annoying activist. Yeah. So on the left, there's no kind of chain of command in terms of, you're a young activist, go and hand out some flyers go for a tenancy union, go and sign some people up to this thing, go and earn your stripes. Just now social media offers people the chance to feel like they're making some sort of impact immediately. And I think we've got a bit scared on the left of saying, no, hold your horses, right? You're 17 years old and you've got a lot to learn. And I think it just led to this sort of inability within the left to really kind of give itself any coherent shape, even for itself to perceive. There's so many different issues that cut over each other and so many conflicts within the left itself. And so I personally feel that that's one ingredient of what's going wrong. It's not about saying young people shut up, certainly not, but it's about you're trying to kind of imbue people coming in with a sense that there is much to learn, including how do you engage with people that disagree with you? How do you talk about issues about immigration on the ground in communities where spikes in the population actually have a negative impact on people's quality of life, and that's not the fault of immigrants or people who live there? That's the fault of an ill thought through immigration policy and communities being under-resourced. You know, we don't on the left have a culture of tolerance towards other moral worldviews, and I think this translates for people looking on at a distance as ideological rigidity, as very kind of strident moral sanctimony, and that these things aren't attractive to people who live complicated lives and who have to make concessions to their integrity every day just to fucking survive. And we've got the time now to have a real serious think about that stuff.
Do you think that there's perhaps a bit of disconnect as well between social media activism and actual real world activism? There's not enough of that going on. Like, people perhaps believe that if I'm online saying all of these things into this echo chamber, that's me doing my bit, whereas actually they need to get out on the streets, knocking doors and speaking to people.
I mean, and just kind of on top of that, one of the things that you notice, and I think because we're Scottish, we have a unique perspective of something that like, well, obviously we had the referendum before, and I almost guarantee that the pair of you have seen the same as me, that if you were to look at your social media feeds and stuff, the outcome that you expected to happen based on what you were seeing around you to what actually happened in the election were very different. So we're now in that. So we've even all certainly felt danger to that very thing, that is, there's people out there. I could have told you, if I looked at my social media feed in the days leading up to the referendum in Scotland, I could have told you without a doubt that Scotland was going to end up as an independent, much the same as I was relatively confident there that Labour were going to do better, certainly in the election, than they did. And that's because exactly what we're talking about, social media.
Yeah, I think the minute the celebrities started to come out and support the Corbyn campaign, I started to see a pattern developing where the Yes movement attracted a lot of kind of high profile artists and stuff like that, and it didn't translate in any meaningful way, because people living in communities with economic insecurities and serious questions about some of the propositions made by the parties that are proposing more radical change, none of their needs are being met by Stormzy endorsing Corbyn. None of their needs are being met by Lily Allen endorsing Corbyn. In fact, they're going to look at these people and go, hang on, yous are multi-millionaires. Yous can afford to be this idealistic. I live in the real world as a single mother with 4 kids, and I've got 17-year-olds banging my door, chatting about Corbyn, chatting about and gluing themselves to trains, doing my napper in, and nobody's got any answers for me. And so there's that aspect of it. There's a genuine disconnect. There's a ravine between the lived experience of people who actually live in their day-to-day lives, wage to wage, and economic quicksand often, and then people who don't have all those responsibilities turning up and proposing this kind of devil may care manifesto without any real understanding of how to deal with serious questions about it if they arise. And that, I think the Corbyn campaign and the Yes movement, they're analogous in the sense that a lot of people were sent out into communities and they weren't armed with how to deal with serious counter arguments to their positions. Instead, they were kind of encouraged to fall back on a sort of vague moral platitudes and a kind of keep the faith sort of politics that, look, this will just work out okay. And it just doesn't work, I think. And the most consequential demographic within the electorate, the people who actually have jobs and they have bills to pay and they're responsible to other people in their lives.
And this kind of brings us on to one of the most interesting aspects when you look at the demography of who voted for who. We kind of assume most of the time that the working class and people from poorer backgrounds will vote Labour. People who are rich will vote for the Conservatives. But when you look at the numbers, that's not actually borne out. I think the Conservatives comfortably outperformed Labour across all social grades, according to the numbers that have been given us. So that's something that we need to go back and rethink as well.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it says a lot when the results are worse than even the period before Blair came on board. Now, Blair is a touchy subject for a lot of people. I mean, obviously, you've got to say, for the first instance, his entire reputation is tarnished with the Iraq War.
The whole war criminal bit.
Right, yeah. And obviously, you know, the only reason I'm not on board with calling him a war criminal is because he's not been charged and convicted of a war crime.
Absolutely.
And so I just like to keep the ball on the deck with a hyperbole and a serious discussion about politics. But there's no question that certainly some of the stuff that even came out in the Chilcot inquiry was quite damning, if it didn't go as far as saying that he was a war criminal, you know what I mean? But where Blairism, which is really just a kind of diluted version of what Bill Clinton done in America, which is a recognition that Reagan and Thatcher changed the goalposts in terms of what the political centre ground was, and that as a matter of electoral necessity, then you weren't going to get a centre-left project elected in government without building a broad coalition of voters behind it. So it's easy now to look back in hindsight and say, well, this is where the Labour Party went wrong. But actually, if you go back before Blair was elected, then you see the scars of decades and decades of defeat. Mm-hmm. Everyone is bearing them. Now, there are things that you can say about Blairism in terms of the actual policies, the impact that they had. That's a separate thing. But just this idea of a centre ground, the centre ground is not inherently anything. The centre ground is what a politician in a political party with a strong team of clever people make it. Mm-hmm. So the centre ground is now Brexit and immigration, because that is where people like Farage and Boris Johnson have steered it, right? In the absence of any great strategic thinking on the left. So I think sometimes when we talk about centrism, we're talking about Blair, we're talking about Clinton, we're talking about too many concessions to the right. Fair enough. But the actual location within an electorate where you need to bring your ideas before the voters is always going to be the centre ground. And so if you're not equipped to navigate that, and you don't have a strategy of how you are going to imbue the centre ground with a specific character and a specific intention that translates to voters, then you're dead in the water. So this whole kind of anti-centrist stuff makes no sense, because even within the left, which is its own wee political paradigm, there's always an attempt to get a consensus. We're always trying to square off the needs of identity politics with the needs of class. We're always trying to find a middle ground between trans activists and women's rights. So any place where you find a diversity of opinion that need to be reconciled in some way in order to move forward, there's going to be a centre ground within it, whether you're talking about the centre ground in society and electoral politics, or whether you're talking about the centre ground within very small activist collectives. And so I think that it's a mistake for people on the left to outright dismiss this necessary process of making some concessions so that you can bring before the people some radical policies that are nested within things that people don't find quite so scary.
I mean, I think there's a massive chasm between what essentially was Corbyn's politics and essentially Boris's politics, like Boris's Conservative Party, to the point where they're so far from each other that if you are in the middle of the road, like if like in looking at the social background of everybody that did vote for the Tories, like you're essentially being asked that what now as things stand, you're either here or you can't see that because it's a podcast, but essentially left or right.
He's waving his hands about, gesticulating furiously.
But like you're essentially quite far left or certainly quite right in your political views, and for the most part I would argue that even the most left of people that I know have centrist and even sometimes bordering on more right-wing positions to do with their tax, for example, or the way that their business operates, or you know what I mean. So and then what happens is let's not talk about the Lib Dems, that's another issue in its own right, but we don't really have anything that is particularly centrist at the present moment. With these two extremes.
Aye.
And one is kind of where we are, and one is extreme on the other side, and we're asking, well, you know, do you want to go for the extreme on the other side?
I think it's important to recognise though that while we might argue that Johnson's Conservatives are not centrist at all. They did a good job of presenting themselves as quite centrist by talking about things like the NHS. We can obviously dismiss a lot of their claims as being hyperbolic or outright lies in terms of the amount of hospitals they were going to build and the nurses that they were going to employ, etc. But they framed themselves as talking about things that actually matter to a lot of people, whereas Corbyn's Labour didn't even really make any attempt to appeal to the centre ground.
No, absolutely not. And in the days before the election, you could see that even when this Ken Loach thing came out and these really effective social media kind of gimmicks that were going on, including whoever was running Corbyn's Twitter account on the day of the election and all of that stuff, really clever stuff where that's where you get your young people involved, you know what I mean, because they're tech savvy, they understand the kind of trends of how memes work on social media and some of the patter that's connecting with young people. But you could see that the Labour's appeal was really, really limited to people who had already decided that they were going to vote Labour anyway. There was no attempt to deal with the Brexit issue. There was no attempt to deal with these charges against Corbyn that his project was just too far left. There wasn't even really. Labour was always just a wee bit too behind the curve, even when it came to the anti-Semitism stuff. There are ways that you can deal with that, whether you regard it as fair or not that it's happening. Obviously, a lot of the concern, I think, I'm not going to speak for people who are Jewish, because I don't know what it's like to be on the receiving end of anti-Semitism, so I'm not talking about them. But I do think a lot of other people who aren't Jewish definitely capitalised on the climate of outrage around Corbyn's party when they saw how vulnerable Corbyn became. And so a lot of people perhaps overstated their sort of vicarious fury at anti-Semitism, because it helped them to make a decision that they had already made before, which was they weren't going to vote Labour at the election. And so this really just provided the sort of alibi that they needed to justify it to themselves.
It gave them a wee bit of moral high ground to take to justify their position.
There's certainly people who I've met in recent months who have told me, well, Corbyn's an anti-Semite, and there are people who, in the nicest possible way, I would be a year ago when I knew them, they never really had a massive opinion on the way that Jewish people were being treated, like, especially where we're from. There's not exactly a massive Jewish community or anything around, but I've still got people in the arse end of Wishaw essentially who will be like, well, you know, Corbyn's an anti-Semite. Man, you've never had an opinion on anti-Semitism in your entire life. Do you know what I mean?
It's a difficult subject to broach, but obviously this is another area where the way the left has been conducting itself has come back to bite it hard. The irony that the leader of the left, the most morally virtuous place on the political spectrum, would be so damaged by racism accusations, whether they're spurious or not, you know. But these are the techniques that we have relied on to advance any argument, you know what I mean? A lot of the culture on the left is just about mudslinging. It's about saying, you've said something that doesn't quite meet my criteria for what's appropriate, so you are one of these three things. And, you know, obviously I do think that kind of the so-called call-out culture and all that, I do think it's become a sort of media trope, and that it's overstated in terms of how impactful or even to the extent that it's going on, but it does go on. And actually a lot of these things that initially we thought was the preserve of the left to morally call out people for their behaviour and their language and all of these things, which is quite right.
Absolutely.
It's all came back to bite us. It's all came back to bite people on the left as we just eat each other, and all of this language that the left has brought into discourse around gaslighting and all of these things. These are all the things now that get labelled against the Labour Party. You're gaslighting the electorate, you're a racist, and all of these things, and we were the ones that let the toothpaste out the tube in that regard, and now actually this is one of the many swamps in which we've become quite mired.
We don't, I'm not speaking for the entirety of the life, but one of the things that you notice quite a lot is the lack of essentially what you've touched on already, which is the lack of tolerance. Like, and it's bringing it back to Scotland again, because it's a much easier test group, if you will, to be able to utilise. If you look at the Yes movement, there's many parts of the Yes movement that seem to miss the component that for you to win the next referendum, the people that essentially the people that you have to have voting for yes are not the people who are already voting for yes. They're already voting for yes. It's the ones who are sitting on the fence, and even arguably some of the people who voted no, you want to be convincing them, but instead of there being any engagement or any conversation, it's just spite and bile. It's just name calling and attacks.
Centrism became a dirty word around about 2016. You know, these ideologues on the left, the centrist dad trope reared its head, and if you had any non-radical left opinions, then you are a sellout. You are, you know, making deals with the devil. You're putting your morals and your ethics aside. But realistically, if we want to win, being principled and being steadfast in your ideology is wonderful. And you know, Corbyn, there's many things about Corbyn that I admire. I admire that he you know, has taken stances on things and wasn't prepared to back down. But unfortunately, taking a stance that you're not going to in any way sort of try and engage with the majority of the tabloid press and the right-wing press in the UK at all is a dangerous game to play that's very likely to lead to you not winning an election. You need to be pragmatic sometimes, and it's all very well being privileged, but being principled, but those principles are worth fuck all if you can actually get into power and affect people's lives for the better. The
most successful centre ground politician probably in Europe right now is Nicola Sturgeon.
Yeah.
And her position hasn't changed a great deal politically. I think Corbyn scared them left a wee bit, which was good. That's why I voted Labour back the previous election, because I felt like the SNP were getting a bit too comfortable not addressing things like child poverty and things like that. So I think that Corbyn definitely did push them left, but ultimately they still retain a position which is broadly centre ground in terms of its appeal to a broader coalition of voters. And while there are leftist insurgencies within the SNP and it is a very broad church, Sturgeon still steers the ship, and she does it very effectively if you're just looking at it in terms of pure political strategy. Now, again, to come back to this idea of the centre ground, if you look at Labour's history, if you look at how often they've been in opposition in the last century, then it's clear something does have to be done. I mean, the social and economic conditions in which the Labour Party was founded are gone. They are gone. You don't have people working in mines anymore. You don't have all of the social conditions that necessitated things like the NHS, the welfare state. And what you do have is, in the 80s, regardless of what our experiences of Thatcherism might have been in the southwest of Scotland, the middle class exploded under Thatcher. And so it was when Blair was in government that the middle class began to outnumber the working class for the first time in our history. So this is what changed the political dynamics. This is why Labour was never going to get elected unless it began to appeal to people who were socially mobile, formerly working class, and as a result of their economic and social mobility, their aspirations and their values changed. So whether it was Blair, whether it was Gordon Brown, whoever it was that was going to do it, the Labour Party back then would not have been seen as a sensible electoral prospect. Tony Blair wasn't trying to get Labour elected for one parliament. He was trying to move Labour to be seen by the country as the natural party of government. So that was a far more ambitious enterprise. And whatever you think of that, it doesn't really matter. It's a fact. So anybody who's coming from the far left who doesn't have that real ability to see things in terms of like 4 elections in advance, as well as understand intuitively where the electorate is without judging them for it, and also finding a way to communicate that clearly with the public at every step of the way, then you're coming up missing. You know, it just doesn't matter how much you hate Blair. It doesn't matter what you think about Iraq. None of that matters. What we're talking about here is pure electoral reality. So whether it's Blair or somebody else, somebody on the left has to come up with an answer to that. And if the answer is, well, we're not going to budge because then we're forsaking our principles, then enjoy a life of being a protest movement, and that's perfectly fine. Leverage powerful people.
But that's all you're ever going to be.
Aye, and that's
You'll always
fine.
be opposition.
No, that is
Yeah,
absolutely fine, right? That's absolutely fine. History shows that actually social movements are some of the most effective means of bringing about change. The social movements call to the conscience of the liberals. They leverage powerful people. They force big concessions to preserve the status quo. So I'm not. That's not a diss when I say that. It's just, be sure in yourself when you come out into your community as an activist. What is it that you're trying to achieve? Do you want to get political power, or do you want to operate at a grassroots level and organise around tangible aims of a community to demonstrate that left-wing ideas have some sort of utility in the lives of ordinary people? Make a choice and then just stick to it. It's like changing your diet every 2 weeks. 1 minute I want to eat a keto diet, you know what I mean? Or next minute I'm going to go for these dirty carbs and just hit the gym. And you're all over the place. Do you know what I mean? You can't sleep, you're off your nut. And I think sometimes people on the left just need to decide what the fuck they're going to do.
Well, and realistically, if you look at the statistics in terms of child poverty, in terms of unemployment, etc., as a country, the working class people and people from poorer backgrounds did far better out of Tony Blair's 15 years or whatever in government than they have done for the past 10 years under the Tories. So we need to have a think about what we want.
When Blair came in, I got double glazing windows, I got central heating, our youth club started opening again. There was more police on the street, there was more programmes to deal with criminality. Now, would I like to be able to sit here and say none of that happened? That we didn't get moved into a brand new school? That the aesthetics of our community didn't improve? Yeah, I've got this ideological superego gnawing away at me that would like to understate all of that reality, but unfortunately it happened.
And I'm not a big fan of Blair in any way, shape or form, but that's the reality. That's the reality.
As, and I mean, I think Labour actually were unfortunate because Labour were hurt by the financial bubble that, even though Gordon Brown was involved in or whatever, had nothing to actually do with Labour as such. I mean, regardless of who was in charge at the time, that bubble, the way the bankers were operating and stuff like that.
I don't agree with you that Gordon Brown had nothing to do with it. Gordon Brown.
No, that's not what I would say. I said Gordon, like Labour as a whole had nothing to do with it. I know Gordon Brown had involvement in it, but Labour as a whole didn't. It would have happened regardless of who was in power.
I do think it probably would have, but I think that Gordon Brown made some poor steps in terms of massive financial deregulation of markets and stuff like that, which led to it, you know.
Well, it shows. I mean, there are a lot of decisions Labour made in terms of the economy that have been extremely harmful. So the deregulation of casinos, gambling places. I mean, we've got a lot of high streets in post-industrial Britain that present the illusion of economic activity, which really are just processes of farming poor people, and in a process of what, like in my book, I talk about it as drag force consumerism. So it's a
predatory.
It's a product or service that exists purely to create profit, and there's no other thought that goes into how honest the product is when it's being sold, the social impact of the product on the person who's experiencing it or purchasing it, as well as the economic externalities and social externalities of it that aren't really foreseen or even accounted for. And in communities, you know, you come from Wishaw, you know the deal, this is one of the places that's hit the hardest, then you see a lot of the means by which people can even spend their money or earn their money. If you look at the sort of economic trajectory of every purchase or every job, you see so many other harms associated with it. But the only thing that's gauged and the only metric by which we measure success is how many numbers are generated by it. And so Labour, really, that's where they really stuck to Thatcherism. They didn't deviate in the slightest, and in many ways they accelerated the process because they didn't understand in working class communities that already there were some wheels in motion around dysfunction and addiction, these behaviours for which there was a massive uptake in the absence of traditional industries. I mean, when you remove an industry around which an entire community is organised and replace it with consumerism, and you make incursions in public spaces so people can't get together and get that sense of fellowship that you need to feel okay and secure, then people become unwell. And this is expressed in all of the health statistics, all of the metrics by which we would measure the progress of a society, from infant mortality to criminality to social mobility. If you imagine society as being like a cockpit, then a lot of these lights are flashing red. But in the centre ground, because people are insulated from a lot of it, they detect it last.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, how many times have you seen centrists or people you would regard as centrists having what they think are big epiphanies on Twitter, and you're just sitting there like, look, we've known sugar was addictive for years.
Well, it's like, if you take Craig Newt, like between Wisha and Motherwell, which fed the Craig, so it fed the Ravenscraig, and pretty much everyone that was in Craig Newt in some form or another worked or had a component to work with the Ravenscraig. Once the Ravenscraig was shut down, essentially Craig Newt had much of what you were talking about, like 3 bookies and about 4 pubs and probably nothing else, maybe a takeaway, and that's really all it had. So, and then suddenly you had lots of people who now didn't have a job at all. It was taken from them, and they had the money that was coming in. If they were spending it, as you were essentially saying, they were spending it in the pub or the bookies for the most part. That's pretty much where they were going, and that's not bringing up that part, and because it's we have an advantage when we look at it because it's such a closed area and it was specifically almost designed to feed the Ravenscraig. Yeah.
Well, it's like the Joe Harari thing with the mice, isn't it? You know, where they've done all that research in the 70s and whatever about addiction, and like they just put a mouse in a cage on its own with like cocaine laced water or whatever, and they all, I think 100% of them just dosed themselves to death. But when you put them later, I think they repeated the experiments, but they put them in communities and they were able to have sex and have interactions with folk and play and do all those other things, and none of them overdosed, you know, and that's basically what you were ripping the heart out of those communities, and you were insulating people.
I mean, I go into this in the second book. One of the things that we don't consider when we talk about regeneration is that it requires the severing of generations of social connections that have been founded around traditional industries. So, you know, let's not fall into the trap on the left of romanticising things like coal mines and all that.
Oh, no, I mean,
do you know what I mean? I know you're only doing that. It's something that happens on the left. It's like, and we used to just work 12-hour days on the mines, and all the men used to get drunk and batter their wives. It's lovely. Kids are traumatised and then became left-wing politicians. Do you know what I mean? And it's like no, look, it wasn't ideal, but but there was a certain degree of utility at the heart of a community because it actually had a centre. Right, so there was a process of you grow up in a community, you see certain behaviour being modelled to you, the community's been there for long enough that it's able to establish its own informal social controls, thus people are grown into an environment where they know what is and isn't expected of them, and we don't need middle class professionals meddling and telling us all how to think and behave. And then people have a process of going on an economic journey, of getting a job and learning to be responsible and having children, and then that process is repeated. So when you're doing regeneration after the collapse of industry, what you're doing is you're taking everybody out a block of flats and you're moving them all over the place away from each other, and you're knocking down the flats, you're building a nicer house, and then you're moving in middle class people to bring up the kind of tone of the area. But actually what you've done is you've severed all the social connections that allow people to function, to feel secure, to have better sense of well-being. When people look back at a certain period in Britain's social history and they seem to be looking through rose-tinted glasses at a time where you could leave your doors open and your neighbours would be able to give your kids into trouble, and you think, what are you talking about, you old bastard? You had less then materially. They did have less materially. Their lives were materially harder. But what they had was a shared identity, a shared sense of history. They were very much connected in a community that was hardwired to look out for itself because it had been established for many, many years. And we don't have that now. The whole aim of the game is to make enough money to get the fuck out your community and leave every cunt there stuck in the swamp. You know what I mean?
It's like if you take like the schools, certainly when we were at school, everyone was going to university by this point because you didn't have things like if we go back one generation, my father's generation, like, you may have wanted to go to university because you wanted to be in the new IT that's coming out, or, you know what I mean, you wanted to be a doctor, you wanted to be a lawyer. But if you didn't want to do that, then you knew you were going to get a job at the Craig. You know, you knew you were going to get a job at the Ravenscraig. Somebody's dad was going to get you a thing, or somebody, your uncle, or actually everybody you knew worked there anyway. So you knew that was a process. But now that's almost like a lost aspect pretty much exactly what you're saying, which is you've now got that scenario where everybody has to go to uni now, and they have to go to Glasgow or go to Edinburgh, get themselves a degree, get a job that doesn't exist because you've got a degree in either something that there isn't actually enough jobs for in the UK as a whole for, or there's something that you've got a degree that there's a million people that have all got the same degree, so you've now entered into some mad cattle market where you have to be the one that's chosen.
Yeah.
But you have also you've replaced all these industries where you required a level of skill, so you need it to go through an apprenticeship, you need it to learn those skills. Most of the work that's available for school leavers and stuff out there is
McDonald's, bookies, chip
it's
shops,
unskilled work, isn't it?
it's-
Like, you know, like you don't need to go through a formal apprenticeship to learn how to use some tools or
Yeah.
anything like that. You're just going on a computer, you're speaking to people.
One of the best things, I think that the Corbyn defeat is being compared to the Foot defeat in terms of the electoral abyss that Labour is left staring into. But one of the best things to come out of that defeat, apart from that process of deeper reflection within the Labour Party, there was always talk about something had to change. It was just obviously Brown really seized the initiative, and then Blair came in under him, and then Blair surpassed him, and we all know how that all worked out between them. But actually one of the best things that came out of the immediate aftermath of that result was Tony Benn's speech in the Parliament, which was one of the most razor sharp analysis of that was really bad grammar. Analyses. Don't know how to. Somebody can tweet and clarify that for me. Obviously, my skill as an Orwell Prize winning author only extends so far. I have really good editors. But
spell checks are wonderful.
Exactly. So his speech in the aftermath of that was how our society was moving towards this kind of constant lauding of entrepreneurialism over people with skills. The people who actually build and administer our society, the people we send in to fix things, the people who do the real dangerous, arduous, often thankless work, you know, going right back to when the London Underground was being built and it was using radical revolutionary technology, and doing things no human had ever attempted. You know what I mean? Who do you think they're sending down there? Do you know what I mean? It's not somebody for eating. Do you know what I mean? Go down there and burrow 2 centimetres a day using this really dodgy steel caged contraption that's holding the shit, layers of shit above you that just drip down on your face as you advance 3 centimetres a day to build the first tunnel under a river, and we'll just see how it pans out. And it ended up becoming the whole engine room of the capitalist society. You know, in London, the story of the London Underground and how it used radical technology, and it was really radical. It was a radical idea, so radical the governments then in the Times columnists all said it wasn't going to work. And this was the thing that gave birth to so many things we now take for granted in our society. So the speech that Tony Benn made, though, he really foresaw this era where really it wasn't just that working class people would no longer have a voice, but it was like the only way that working class people would be acknowledged would be if they could be exploited electorally, or if they could be fetishised in some way, you know, because if you go to any museum, you see working class community being fetishised. If you go to Byers Road, Ashton Lane, there's all these murals that are all about what it was like in Govan at a certain time. Then, you know, the working class are frozen in this time capsule.
Miners covered in coal dust and all that kind of stuff.
Aye, exactly.
Aye, I mean, like, but then the other side, and again, something that you touched on, but there is that rose tinted glasses bit that comes under where, like, most of the guys that I know that worked in the Craig all have, like, various health problems and stuff. I mean, it's in, like, because they were breathing in shit you shouldn't be breathing in, and like using chemicals that now you wouldn't be, you know what I mean, you wouldn't be allowed to touch without having head to toe gear on. And like, Matt, to give you just a quick idea of some of the things that happened, my uncle who did work there was round the other day visit my mum for her birthday, and he was saying that they used to have a set of they had a rail that ran out of that ran the coke at the coke ovens, right? And when it didn't work, it had a diesel engine that they connected to it so that could run. It usually ran on tram lines. One day, one of the ovens collapsed. Everything fell out it. The diesel thing was going to blow up. It was all sitting across. So one of the boys who worked there just walked across all the hot coals to disconnect the diesel engine, moved it to one side, moved it to the other thing, and he got like a couple of pints bottom for him at the pub, and that was it. And he essentially stopped what would have been a chain reaction at explosions that went across, but it was like that every day, and there was boys that were putting themselves out in danger, like all the time.
Aye, and it's, I think I'm not arguing for like a sort of elevation of one class over the other. We all have different skills to bring, and it's just, I think Tony Benn was right in the sense that we're really kind of, for our young people, we're modelling a specific idea of success which often doesn't really have any tangible benefit for the broader community. It's about individual aspiration. It's about, you will be hailed as a hero, as a job creator, as a wealth creator, but clearly not a great deal of wealth's being created. The people who are getting by are just getting by. But just before we kind of come to the end of it, I think the final thing that I would say for the left, right now, when I talk about the left, often I'm talking about the left as I believe it's seen by other people not on the left. Right? Sometimes I don't make that distinction clear enough. When I speak publicly, I always try to have an awareness of who might be listening.
Yeah.
This is something that people on the left don't do. They speak from a position of other people on the left are going to hear this. So there's this ideological superego that's always gnawing away at all of us. It might be, see some of the stuff I said about Blair earlier on, or some of the stuff I said about any of the stuff I said earlier on. There's an ideological superego that gnaws away at me when I approach these topics, because I know how I should say it if I believe I'm truly a lefty, and then there's how actually I think I should say it the proper way. That's me that's resisting that. Now, everybody on the left has that. Everybody on the left thinks things and wants to say things that they know that other people in our community are going to frown upon, and those people that would frown upon them are also having the same conflicts within themselves. And so for me, that there is a real kind of, there's a real bad culture on the left of being able to contend with other moral worldviews. And this is something we're going to need to get better at. If you're going to critique capitalism, start by talking about some of the benefits that some of the people in the community might have experienced when you're criticising it. If you're going to critique centrism, start by acknowledging some of the benefits of things that have been brought through the centre ground, like the NHS and the welfare state. It wasn't a bunch of radicals that set that stuff up. So begin with a more mature, emotionally measured analysis that takes into account how the people you're trying to persuade or learn from actually experience the society in which they live. Now, whether they experience it because they're told the wrong information, or whether they experience it because actually it's legitimate for somebody to say, well, actually, I quite like the society. The status quo is no perfect, but I would prefer incremental change than a big radical shift in one direction or the other.
And that's maybe somewhere where the manifesto took a misstep, because it was proposing all of this radical change, the more, rather than, a programmed sort of over the next maybe 10 to 20 years, this is where we would like to get to.
And no strategy to deal with the very obvious repercussion of that sort of manifesto, which is people with real investment in the status quo are going to come after you, and they're going to come after you like you're the most dangerous person in the world, because to them you are.
Yeah.
So if your only strategy of dealing with that is, look, the media don't like me because I haven't had a shave, it's like, come on, man. Like, come on. When you're contending with that sort of media criticism, you understand why back in the early 90s Blair and Brown formulated the strategy they did, because the media environment in which they were going to operate was one of the things that formed their analysis. And it's the same with Sturgeon. I mean, Sturgeon and the SNP have been marginalised and criticised and satirised by media in Scotland for as long as they have existed. They're the most successful political party in Scottish political history, the most successful party in Britain if you actually look at what they've achieved in terms of shifting the needle towards their aims. And this is as while they're facing the full might of the British state often before the referendum, and still, because they are savvy and clever and navigate intelligently in political sense and a media sense, then they're able still to find out, they're able to carve out their own space in the discussion and become impervious impervious in many ways to certain forms of focused media criticism. Corbynism just doesn't have that. It doesn't even see the validity in trying to have that. It thinks trying to be media savvy is just buying into the status quo. And so there's a certain undercurrent of contempt for the centre ground. There's a contempt for the way that ordinary people see things and presenting things in a way that ordinary people might find appealing, including having a shave and wearing a fitted blazer, and it's just not going to wash or translate to anything except radical posturing.
Well, it reminds me of the tweet that you put out, which basically said, you know, if a heavyweight fighter wants to win a boxing match, he has to get in the ring and put on gloves. If whether or not he wants to do that doesn't matter. Aye,
if somebody that has aspirations to become the heavyweight champion, they want to do it, they've got to go through the normal procedures there. Now, see if they want to run about the community and just headbutt a phone box, headbutt the inside of a pishy phone box for 20 years, they can do that, right? But they can't walk around telling people they seriously want to be a boxing champion, because they're not interested in engaging in the actual process of actually becoming that. And whether we like it or not, there is a reality, a political, economic, media reality out there. And if you want to gain government for anything longer than an intermittent period, when you want to bring about some change, then you're going to have to learn how to navigate within that, because there is no way around it.
I mean, the appearance thing and even the way that they present across the board is one of the things we've actually discussed before. People elect politicians, like, so as in, if you were to ask any person pretty much over the age of about 15 what a politician looked like, there is certain aspects of politicians that are just what people expect. Do you know what I mean? They will be wearing a suit and they will be turned out in a particular way. The hair will be gelled. They will hold their language correctly.
Yeah, and Tony Blair didn't invent this.
No.
Why do kings wear crowns? Why do priests wear robes? I mean, come on. It's just a natural reality of human behaviour and how we function in groups and crowd psychology and how we track one another socially and compare our status to other people's status and all that lobster shite that Jordan Peterson taught. Right? It's just a natural fact that for someone to be put in charge of consequential things in our society, they have to present themselves in a certain way. Now, Corbyn knows this. The reason he presented himself the way that he did is because that appeals to radicals.
Aye.
So he wore the clothes he wore. I'm not saying he was pure conscious, like, oh my God, I'm just going to go out looking like a geography teacher all the time. But he knew he was signalling to his base, I have contempt for the way that people in the centre ground behave, so I'm going to kind of signal subtly through my kind of lack of consideration to my actual presentation that I'm too cool to wear a fitted suit and have a shave, and that stuff shouldn't matter. And it's like, well, cool, maybe it shouldn't. Maybe it's an indictment of the superficiality and shallow nature of the centre ground and the idiocy of the general population, but ultimately it's not worked out very well.
Yeah. You're still not going to get voted for it.
Exactly. Like,
when you see, if you ever put on the news and you see a CEO from any company, any of the largest companies in the world, very rarely do they show up wearing a tweed jacket with arm pads and they're no shaved. And the reason for that is because they're expected to present themselves in a certain way.
Their share price would go fucking down.
Look at how working class people. Look, if you want to be a barista, or you want to be a fucking electrician, or you want to be an air hostess, see if you're turning up with a pair of joggies on and fucking face tattoos, you're going to get told to fuck off.
Aye.
Is that right? Probably no. Is it the reality? Aye, it absolutely is. Now, I realise throughout the course of this conversation, some of the things that I've said are problematic on numbers of levels for numbers of people. What I would suggest to anybody out there who has a problem with anything that I've said, to just put it in writing, because I'll be happy to address it. Whatever it is, if it's me showing some sort of nuance in my perspective on Blair, I'm not talking about Iraq. I'm talking about somebody who thought through strategically how to get the left into the political power and just dealing with that reality. Or if anybody has an issue with anything else that I've said, put it in writing, do a podcast, whatever you want to do. I'm happy to talk about it, because I'm not shying away from this stuff anymore. I fear that I'm going to be accosted by a radical intellectual who's very useful when it comes to framing things in abstract terms, but rubbish at actually engaging with ordinary people who were supposed to be trying to get on board with left-wing ideas.
Well, I think that seems like a pretty good place to stop. Thanks very much for coming on, Darren. It's been a pleasure, mate, and hopefully we'll have you back again.
Cool, nice one. Good to be with you guys. Cheers.
Absolutely. Thanks. Right.